Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amelia Neptune. I'm with the League of American Bicyclists, and I'm really excited to welcome you all here today to join us for On Your Left, the transformative power of e-cargo bikes in your community's vehicle fleet. Here at the League, the Bicycle Friendly Community Program is always really excited to see innovations in communities all across the country, including things like replacing vehicle fleets with e-cargo bikes. And so we were really excited when Saris approached us to oops, Patricia, we could see that, just to warn you. We're really excited when Saris approached us about co-hosting this webinar. So I really want to thank our co-hosts at Saris for putting together this fantastic group of presenters. And I also want to thank all of our speakers today for taking the time to share your expertise and wisdom. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Patricia. And Patricia, we can still see in edit mode, but I think once you switch to presenter mode, we'll be in good shape.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we would like to obviously thank the League of American Cyclists for allowing us to come out today and talk a little bit about using e-cargo bikes in a fleet capacity in a municipal setting. We really would like to encourage everyone to join the League and to visit your website at bikeleague.org to either join with your membership. And also next week is Giving Tuesday, so feel free to donate and donate often. Right there, middle of the screen in how to get involved, and that would be wonderful. So today we're going to talk a little bit about, how to use e-cargo bikes and how e-cargo bikes can supplement your fleet and help your community reach its climate goals, provide additional employment opportunities, save money, and also become a more bike-friendly community. And I'd like to introduce our panel here. We have a lovely international panel. First up, we have Mike Basarich from Saris, the director of Saris and Saris Infrastructure. Then we have Renee, Callaway, the pedestrian bicycle administrator from the wonderful city of Madison. Maddie Dumas, who is also from the city of Madison, who is a vegetation coordinator, taking care of a lot of our greenways and things with our Department of Transportation. All the way from Amsterdam, we have Meredith Glaser, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam's Urban Cycling Institute. And finally, we have Claudia Wasko from Bosch. She is the GM of Bosch eBike Americas, and we are incredibly excited for her to join us today. And my name is Patricia Kapinos, and I am a sales manager here at Saris. So we're going to kick it off and have Mike give us the overview and get us started here. Mike, can you tell us why we're here? How did we get started on e-cargo bikes and what exactly this is all about?
From Saris's perspective, our involvement traces, I think, to the intersection of my personal interest in cargo bikes and my professional interest. And my personal interest, I've been a fan of cargo bikes for years, and probably the love affair started when I was living in Europe and actually chasing Meredith around Amsterdam on her e-cargo bike. But you certainly saw the efficient way cargo bikes were used to transport kids and cargo. But I'll admit that there's a certain bias when you see cycling and cycling infrastructure in Europe as someone who works in North American bicycle mobility. And I think there's a lot of people on this call who've been to a conference in the last decade or 15 years where there was either a keynote speaker or a breakout session or some sort of presentation about what European cities are doing around bicycle infrastructure. And you sort of fall into this habit of lumping these things all together, like, oh, look at the Dutch and the Danish with their raised cycle tracks and their cargo bikes and their cycle superhighways and their 50% mode share, right? And so it is certainly a little bit of cynicism when you see these things, because you know that there are ways we can do that in the US, but it's tough because you're sort of callous to it. Even though I came back to the US and bought a cargo bike for my family. And so professionally, I think where it started was I attended a TRB conference. That's the Transportation Research Board annual conference in DC in, I think, 2018. And if anyone's ever been to that, it's this like monstrosity of transportation research and analytics. But I found a small little nugget in there, and that was a research paper that was done by the city of Hamburg. And they were reporting on some empirical analysis they did around replacing garbage trucks with cargo bikes. And their real focus was about cost, that there was this cost benefit to them and not having to spend all this money on an actual garbage truck or vehicle, and they could do it with an eCargo bike. And that was like sort of the first inklings of where cargo bikes could fit within municipalities. And then a few months later, I was at a Velocity conference in Europe where the city of Hamburg was actually presenting. And they again listed all of the benefits that they saw, primarily around cost, but they touched on obviously the sustainability aspect, the health benefits. But at the very end, and it was almost like a throwaway comment, where they said they saw a real marketing advantage, or sort of like a PR. They saw the bikes as a PR tool to message to the citizens that they thought bicycling was important. And it was almost like this soft sales tool. And it was at that moment where it sort of triggered with me that this was an opportunity for us to be involved, because Saris is all about, we have products that make communities more bicycle friendly. And oftentimes these products, when they're not being used, serve that tool. So think of a public repair stand. I mean, how often have you seen someone use it? It's oftentimes just sort of sits there, but it doesn't just sit there. It's actually communicating to cyclists and to community members that cycling and cycling infrastructure is important. And when I saw sort of the bike performing that function, that's what sort of started the process of me finding partners to come up with a solution specifically for municipalities from a product standpoint, and then ultimately led to the pilots that Renee and Maddie will talk about, as well as the pilot in Portland.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's go over to Renee and have her give us a little overview. So Renee, it was a little over a year ago that you helped me schlep a lot of heavy trade show equipment off of a plane into the APBP conference out in Portland. And at that time, Mike ended up, you guys had some dinner, and next thing you know, there's this crazy eCargo concept in my eyes. But you've done an amazing job championing this project, and it's pretty incredible what you've done bringing this to the city of Madison and how many different departments that you've had it gone through. And I think a lot of what we want to do here is give our audience a idea of how to get this done in their own city. So we want to pick your brain. If you could tell us a little bit about, how did you go from a dinner with Mike Basarich in Portland at a conference to, I mean, it was about what, 6 months, 7 months later, I think it was August to March when we did the first focus group.
Yeah, so we are fortunate here in Madison in that way back in 2015, in our bicycle plan, we had this idea that we should address the idea of freight in the bicycle plan. And I said, I work on that. And I was actually in a slightly different job then. And I said, yeah, I really want to work on that. I think that's really interesting. And so we wrote like a tiny little section on bicycles and freight delivery. And I think ever since then, it had been my sort of, one of my goals was to make something happen around that. And so when Mike mentioned this idea to me a year ago, I was like, yeah, we'll do it. We are very interested. And then I had to come back to the city and deliver on that. But it definitely helped that we had already written a chapter that really encouraged the use of cargo bikes and examining new ways they could be used within the city. And it also definitely helped that we were using bikes generally. It wasn't unusual. We can check out a bike share pass. Some of our departments have their own bike. So that whole idea of a bike was out there. So now it was just taking the next step and saying to people who, you know, couldn't use those bikes, we have an opportunity for you. And one of my first steps was to bring in our sustainability coordinator, because this is a natural fit for her. This is something that I knew she would be interested in. The idea of more bikes is a part of our sustainability plan as well. So I brought her in because she has contacts that I don't have. And really, in many ways, we just traded on our relationships within the city to get people to think about this idea.
That's awesome. And you guys have seriously taken this in a direction, and I applaud you for getting it done. So one of the things, if you could tell us, how did this get started? So it didn't just generate we have this idea, but what happened next was, you know, there was a roundtable discussion that happened literally, I think, the week before COVID exploded in the world. So tell us a little bit more about this roundtable. You did a really good job of bringing a lot of different people and viewpoints and perspectives to this roundtable. Some of them were very into it, and some of them were not.
Sure. So our timing was very strange. It was just shortly before we all started working from home. And really, I just brainstormed with our sustainability coordinator, what are some departments that we think use this? Who do we know there? And how can we get them to come to a meeting? So it was definitely come to this meeting, no obligation to purchase, right? Like it's just come, see the bikes, talk about the bikes, give us some initial impressions, and then we got as many people as we could to get on the bike and actually just ride it around the downtown and see what it was like, touch it, like examine it, just to kind of gauge for departments where you might think, okay, they're going to be a little skeptical. Like even my own department, traffic engineering, we have a shop with all kinds of employees that, you know, drive around and fix things and put up signs. And, you know, I just wanted people from my own department who oversee those types of operations to, you know, see what it's all about, give it a whirl. I mean, obviously people who work in the ped bike program naturally are like, oh, cool, yeah, we want to use that. But what about all the people who are used to driving trucks all day? Like, how can I get them to see this and touch it and get on it and think about it?
Yeah, it is incredible with the trucks. So many workers, I thought it was going to be so many workers saying, hey, I don't want to get out of my truck. And I have a truck, I get it. But it's been interesting to watch which ones are kind of stick to that and which ones have kind of transitioned away from maybe there is a different way to do things some of the time, which has been great. So speaking of like what jobs and tasks that were done with the cargo bike, can you walk us through which departments had it, you know, how did they use it, that sort of thing?
Sure. So I think back in March when we did the roundtable, there were definitely areas that we didn't get to do. Like I was imagining how great this would be for public meetings, but our meetings are virtual. So once I decided, okay, you know, we're going to be working in new ways and we just need to launch this regardless of what's happening with the pandemic, which, as some of you may know, is not going very well here in Wisconsin. Well, we just decided we're going to start using it. So, you know, Maddie, who's here, is going to talk a little bit about her work, so I won't. But, you know, I really wanted to get it in the hands of people like in our parks department. What kind of jobs could they do? Our forestry department used it to do some tree planting in our downtown, where, you know, they're working in very tight areas. Yes, there's some pictures. We had it like our downtown, what we call our mall concourse, which is between our university and our Capitol. The staff there used it to do some garbage pickup, do other kinds of jobs like that. It's a transit ped bike mall, so areas like that, this was a really, you know, it's not a space where it's easy to have a bunch of trucks. You know, my own unit, I did allow them finally to get their hands on it, and they did some interesting things like move a bike rack and take bikes out to an area so kids could just ride them. Yeah, there's the bike rack being moved. And, you know, my goal was really to try to get it into hands too of people who were more skeptical about using it, or places where maybe someone in the department was skeptical. So we had skeptical supervisors, and we had skeptical employees, and we had people who were on both sides really gung-ho, and we tried to kind of get it out there. And, you know, the interesting part was when my department had it, traffic engineering, I knew that a lot of them were pretty skeptical, so I was, you know, always excited. Like, I heard, okay, we're going to move this bike rack, and then one of my employees used it to take bikes out for kids to ride. But then I heard, oh yeah, like one of the employees like took it out, and I was like, okay, so like they saw it sitting there, and we were going to use it for some particular things, but it, you know, grabbed people's attention, and then they were willing to give it a try one day. And I think that's it. Like, I know that we had some departments that didn't get it. They saw other people using it. Our library asked about it. Like a botanical garden that asked about it. And we didn't have time because we got a later start because of the pandemic. So we didn't get it to everyone, but there was a lot of energy of people like thinking and curious about it.
Yeah, it's awesome. I loved how many people were, it was very interesting to watch who it resonated with and who was like, nope, I'm not doing that. Don't like it. And these guys that did the tree planting here, and that's a 400-pound tree in that bike, which it was the most impressive thing I've ever seen a bike do. It's like, y'all are kidding me. You're putting it in there with a forklift. But these guys who I kind of expected to hate it, I mean, they were probably the most enthusiastic ones of the bunch. I think the guy riding it has asked me 3 times if he could take it deer hunting, you know. I'm like, I think you're gonna have to buy it for that one, bud. But, one thing I would like to ask, so were there any unexpected challenges, or what was your greatest challenge that you maybe can anticipate other city employees that are trying to do this running into?
Sure. So obviously, you know, we rolled this out a little differently than we would have ideally liked to. You know, I had this idea that like our first get together that we did pre-pandemic, that we would have some more of those to kind of like hype it up, answer questions. We just decided that didn't seem like a good idea for us here right at this time. So definitely, you know, we heard, and I don't know if you'll talk about this more, from some employees who just saw this as like, this is gimmicky. Why is the city wasting their money on this? You know, just sort of feeling a little bit negative about the whole idea that the city would be, you know, owning these bikes, which we didn't actually yet own them. We are still working on purchasing our own now that the pilot just ended. But, you know, I think that was out there. And, you know, some of those people did, like, they were people who used it, but they still felt like maybe this was too gimmicky and not practical. And it would have been nice, I think, to have a bigger get together and kind of talk through the goals and everything at once. But since we were, you know, everyone's trying to work more separately as much as possible, I just felt like the time wasn't right for that, but something that we would do when we move into a permanent program is like kind of inform the employees a little bit more about the goals and how we see these being used and why these are a valuable purchase and make sense for the city.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's been an interesting benefit with the bikes that I've heard from you in some other cities that they didn't want to put workers and trucks into a truck anymore. So having alternative, you know, modes of transportation or bikes, even if it's just a bike, was something with the pandemic that they liked. So I'm going to throw this over to Maddie here, someone who actually used our bike as in her job. Hi, Maddie.
Hi.
How's it going today?
Great.
Great. So you are the vegetation coordinator for the City of Madison Traffic Engineering. What does that mean?
Actually, I work for the stormwater section of the engineering division. The stormwater section owns about 1,600 acres of stormwater management land. So that would be retention ponds and greenways that kind of funnel stormwater into our area lakes and ponds. And as the Greenway vegetation coordinator, my job is to try to improve the vegetation improve the functionality of these areas. So I do everything from controlling invasive species to planting rain gardens, collecting native seed, minor erosion repair things, brush control, and really hands-on field work and the planning that goes into that. So when I found out about the test with the cargo bike, I was pretty excited because we work in all areas of the city. The engineering division manages land along bike paths as well as really narrow corridors, older parts of the city that didn't have stormwater infrastructure planned. They were just maybe farm ditches that became stormwater infrastructure. So some of those areas can be really difficult to access. So I thought, hey, a bike could be helpful for us.
Yeah, it's been great. And I think one thing that you mentioned is that you would usually take a truck on the bike path.
Yes. So again, engineering manages a lot of the land along our bike paths, and we have miles and miles of these. So in order to efficiently do our work, we often would need to drive our vehicles down bike paths. They're heavily used, and it never really feels good to drive a gas-powered vehicle down a corridor that's meant for pedestrians and bikers. So it was really exciting for me to be able to ride a bike through these areas. I sort of thought of it as like a complete 180 in public perception as well, from maybe the occasional wry look or frown when I'm driving my truck, to just all smiles from the public when we would bike by, and a bike fully loaded with the tools that we need to do our job.
Yeah, did you get any fun comments from the public?
Yeah, definitely. I only got positive comments from the public. My favorite was a group of kids who stopped me to ask if we used the cargo bike to transport puppies, which we did not, but
that's cute.
Yeah, a lot of jokes. Hey, what flavors of ice cream are you selling today? Things like that. But when people ask questions about what we were actually doing, that's when it felt really beneficial, because as opposed to when you're sheltered inside your truck, you don't seem very approachable. People feel like they can interact with you when you're out on your bike, and it's a very interesting looking bike at that. So
yeah, I would always get a lot of comments about ice cream.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like we need to do that though, just for fun. So one question that I think comes up a lot is about charging the bike, because it is obviously an electric bike. What did you guys do to get it charged, and did you charge it off of the power grid, or was it off of solar, or how was the city doing that?
I know that Fleet did charge the bike off of their solar charging station. For our purposes, we wanted just a right central location. So we had custodial landscaping shed attached to a municipal building downtown, which is very centrally located. And we were able to just store the bike there overnight. It was inside, so hidden from view, sheltered, and also had access to power, so we could just charge it at night when we weren't using it. In non-pandemic times, the starting point for most of our crew would be right downtown. So you'd commute downtown, jump on your bike, and you can go really anywhere.
Yeah, for sure. So what did you, thinking of it in a capacity of a work truck, because this isn't necessarily meant to be a pleasure bike, it's a working tool, a supplement to the fleet. What did you think worked well with it? Did you have any things that you liked best, or some things that you didn't like about the bike in doing your job with it?
I could kind of break it down to the immediate benefits for us were obvious. I mean, it was so much more maneuverable, again, on bike paths and in tight spaces, and yet we could fit a brush cutter in there. We could fit storage tubs and garbage cans, garbage bags of seed, and all of our tools that we needed for the day, and yet still be able to navigate through narrow areas. I can remember a time when we were working on one of our bike paths. We were just hand pulling weeds, throwing them in garbage bags, and we didn't know how far down the path we would need to work. So it was really easy to have someone jump on the bike and scout ahead, as opposed to walking was a little bit slower, or driving around the bike path or even down the bike path. So really maneuverable, easy to use. Again, I think I kind of touched on this, but another immediate benefit was the connection that we have with our residents. Just so many more questions about what our work is and what we're doing. I think people who didn't even know that we did this kind of work were stopping to ask us questions. And I even had one person say, oh, maybe I'll pull that weed on my morning dog walks or things like that. So that was a plus for that. You know, one thing I didn't love about it, it's a little rattly when you go over curb cuts, and I'm a road cyclist. I like to bike fast, so I had to consciously tell myself it's not, you know, we're not racing here. We're just trying to get from point A to point B, and we're hauling a lot of stuff. It's a big vehicle, so I had to really slow down over curb cuts and things like that. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I heard there was some cargo bike drag racing at some of the some of the places, which I think is awesome. Any advice that you would give to other cities looking to do this?
Yeah, you know, one other benefit that I think cities might not think of immediately is that we do have youth groups that we work with. We have a lot of positions through our parks department where we would love to hire youth crews to do, you know, simple jobs for our parks, you know, hands-on physical field work of the type that I do. But most of those jobs require people to have a driver's license, which you know, can be an impediment to hiring all sorts of really qualified candidates, particularly youth. So I think having a bike as an option for potential employees to use is great, and in many cases that would be all that's needed. You wouldn't need a driver's license to do your job. So that's one thing that cities could consider, you know, opening up your pool of candidates. Another thing I would say, it's really helpful if you can give everyone a chance to test drive it in a really controlled environment before you send them out into the world. I had a couple of crew members who were a little nervous about using it, and we just had them bike around the block, you know, bike in a quiet residential area first, and that kind of upped everybody's confidence. And then finally, I would say, you know, consider sharing between agencies. So for my needs, a lot of the sites that we need to access are in far-flung parts of Madison, so cargo bike doesn't always make sense. It's not time efficient. But if we could set it up so we're sharing with another agency, so they're using it for part of the summer, and when we need it to do, you know, specific, you know, inner city areas, it would be great. And not only that, but I was one of the people that was approached by another city employee from our local botanic garden saying, hey, this looks really cool. How do I get in on this trial? And, you know, I'd never met this person. I maybe never would have met this person, but we were able to form a relationship because of that interaction. And he actually got me set up with a seed collecting site in the fall. So I think just fostering communication between agencies, anytime you can share tools and equipment, you share ideas and people meet who wouldn't otherwise have met. And it really, I think, fosters a dynamic relationship among city employees. So I thought that was a cool extra bonus benefit.
Wow, I hadn't heard that one yet. I like that. It's pretty cool that it's going that way. And the you know, the youth thing and especially equity is such a huge part of this, opening up job opportunities for people who, for whatever reason, don't have driver's licenses, and it's perfectly okay to not have a driver's license, but, you know, and also opening up funding opportunities for some of these jobs with Operation Fresh Start and whatnot. So that is awesome, Maddie. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the bike and had a lot of fun on it. And thank you again for all of your wonderful work you do in our city, making it beautiful. I for one, appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks. And I think we're going to go to Mike now, who can give us a little bit of more information on the actual data we collected on the pilot. What happened with our pilot, just so everyone is aware, the original intent before COVID happened was to have additional pilot meetings and to do some actual hands-on training with the bike, which we feel is very important for safety. Because of COVID, that changed everything that we were planning. So Mike, are you still on?
Yeah, so the pilot, the goal of the pilot, from our perspective, was threefold. One, just from a strictly product development, product management standpoint, we wanted feedback about the bike, what they liked, what they didn't like, features and benefits that they would like to have, given the various jobs that it performed. So strictly product management role. The second, and Renee touched on this, is gathering feedback on all the different jobs it could possibly do, and understanding what jobs it was good at and what jobs it wasn't good at. And the third was understanding if there was a sort of prototypical city employee that had success with the bike and saw the bike as a really good tool. And that was sort of, we borrowed that from the city of Hamburg, where they thought it was really important to have this set of early adopters within the city that could champion it internally. And so to collect the data for all of those three purposes, we did several different surveys. We did a pre-pilot questionnaire where we gathered the sort of demographic information from all of the participants. The second was a daily use survey, where after the day was done, they would then fill out a log that sort of defined what they used the bike for that day. And then that was followed by sort of a post-pilot discussion. And so we were able to collect all that information and sort of distill it down to some really good takeaways. And so you can sort of see the highlights there. We had, while there was only 12 participants that filled out the questionnaire, I think we had over 22 people actually ride the bike. We had 17 daily user logs filled out that represented 5. And in fact, that's actually, this is a little bit old. We've had some more trickle in. I think we have 21 user logs filled out as of today. People find them in their office or at their home and are sending them in. We had over 200 total miles were ridden. We had actually over 20 hours total pedaling time, and you can see the tasks that were performed there. What I think is really important here is I sort of had a suspicion that a successful user with the city was someone sort of like Maddie or someone sort of like Renee. They were cyclists. They already believed in the efficacy of a cargo bike. And that was sort of what I thought coming into it. And as it turns out, there is zero correlation between sort of any demographic characteristic, male, female, age, fitness ability, cycling proficiency. None of that translated into how people rated the bike as putting it up against an actual vehicle. And so we had, for instance, a 55-year-old male in the parks department who hadn't ridden a bike in 15 years, rated it 5. They could scale it 1 to 5. They rated it 5 out of 5 in terms of its utility relative to his normal fleet vehicle. We had a 40-year-old woman also in the parks department who rides a bike maybe once a year, who self-identifies as having poor physical fitness, said it was rated at 4 out of 5. So we didn't see any of what we sort of thought were that we would need these sort of internal champions that sort of fit this mold that we thought needed to exist. And so I think that's really a positive takeaway to all the other cities, that while I think it is important to have some early adopters and some internal early champions, it's having a high level of physical fitness or being a cyclist or being young is not a prerequisite for success. And I think that was a big takeaway.
Absolutely, and I love how it continues to evolve as different departments get it. People, like Maddie said, people see it, and then now I want to use it, and different departments want to use it, and we're seeing that starting to happen at our other pilot in the city of Portland. So it's really fun and unique, and I personally think that's what's going to start happening in all cities. Once you get one on the ground, it's going to expand and become more visible. And what did you find the takeaways from the city of Madison pilot?
Yeah, well, I think it's not key to find a specific person that meets these certain characteristics. I think what you do have to have is some really good training, and Renee talked about it, and I think the trainings fall into several buckets. One is just how to use the bike. It's an eCargo bike. It's pedal assist. There are tricks and techniques to shifting and using the assist based on going up hills and down hills. There's just basic bike operation. This is a big or larger three-wheeled bike, and so just feeling comfortable operating it with loads. The third would be where I think the league can play a really big role, and that is just sort of the rules of the road. One of the questions we asked in the pre-pilot survey was we had a list of concerns, and you could rank them 1 to 5, least concerned to most concerned. And one of the biggest concerns was cycling next to vehicles, and I think what the league cycling instructors do, the curriculum that they can provide, I think is a perfect fit for cities, especially cities that may have a risk management, risk tolerance issue with putting in place on bikes, that you can sort of prove that cities have gone through some curriculum that gives them some comfort and some tools for cycling in the city's infrastructure. And then the fourth is really training, and Renee and Maddie both touched on this, is the why behind the city is doing it. So being able, both internally, among employees, what are the benefits that you will see by having by using the bike? Health, sustainability, potentially operational efficiencies. I mean, you'll see that in point number 2. The bike was better in some tasks than a fleet vehicle. And so just being able to better message to the employee the whys behind it, I think is super important. The second takeaway, obviously the bike performed really, really well. We didn't know, I mean, we knew, as Renee talked about, we had this roundtable where we were brainstorming. We obviously wanted it to be successful. And so, you know, we did cherry pick a little bit in terms of what tasks we sort of knew the bike would be good at. But we also didn't want to just sort of lie by omission. Like we wanted the bike to go through its paces and find out what it did well at and what it didn't do well at, so we could then talk to other cities about setting them up for success. And as it turned out, there's some tasks where the bike performed better than a fleet vehicle. And I think where that's important is we know all these other benefits to the bike, from climate, sustainability, emissions, equity to cost and health. But sometimes we don't want those boxes to be checked at a cost of actual utility. And it turned out that the bike performed really, really well at a lot of different jobs that we hadn't even considered, like planting trees. And then the last is the sort of bike friendliness component and the sort of engagement component that the bike does. Incredible sort of rolling billboard for the city. As Maddie mentioned, the employees are much more approachable. It communicates something to the citizenry about what's important for the city. And I think it's hard to quantify, but it's certainly a tangible benefit that should be understood.
Absolutely. I thought it was great that people started writing into the mayor about it. You know, that was pretty cool. And it's pretty neat. I think all my friends in town would, even on Saturday, would tell me, hey, I saw the bike. Is that your bike? That's the big Saris bike, right? So it was pretty cool how it evolved and took on a little bit of its own life within the city. So moving on to Meredith, our wonderful eCargo bike researcher from Amsterdam. Hi, Meredith.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, and I apologize, or thank you for joining us on this very late. I think it's probably 9 or 10 where you're at.
It's almost 10 o'clock. Yeah, it's almost 10 o'clock at night, yeah.
Well, thank you very much
for having me.
For joining us. Yeah. So you study cycle logistics. right? Where
well, so I don't necessarily, my research is not particularly on the topic of psychologistics, but my team, our group of researchers with the Urban Cycling Institute, we all use the bike as a lens to study a whole bunch of urban phenomena. So we have colleagues who are studying not only psychologistics, but cargo bikes in general, how cargo bikes are represented in the city, and these social phenomena about cargo bikes. And we also have partners at the Applied Sciences University who are also studying city logistics and psychologistics. So. But also, yeah, just to give some context too, I am an American in the Netherlands. So that also gives me a little bit of a unique perspective, I think too, especially in terms of this webinar, and also what a place like the US, what cities in the US can learn from things that are going on in Europe.
Absolutely. I really love your perspective, especially understanding the American challenges or point of view and differences from adopting cycling infrastructure and technology in America versus Europe. A little bit more challenging sometimes.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's some big differences. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when we talk about using bikes in transportation and logistics and all that, what type of city characteristics? I hear a lot of times people say that won't work here. We're not Portland, we're not Madison, we're not insert city name. What do you see, and what do you see in research and over there that works?
Yeah, I mean, it's also a really broad question too of what city characteristics, in terms of either spatial characteristics or political characteristics, social characteristics. There's all different types of factors. And in terms of psychologistics or cargo bikes, we actually don't have a lot of research on this topic. It's really new. There's some pilots that have been studied and used, but we don't know a lot of these, critical success factors, especially because there's so much diversity and scale in the programs being implemented. But if we, for example, take spatial characteristics, then we can also see that, of course, cities with moderate to higher densities of populations might see more success. And also, what is success too? I mean, we have to think about what these things mean. But if cities have higher densities, then there are more people living in closer proximity. There are different types of land uses, packed into smaller areas. Can I get a confirmation that people can hear me?
We can hear you, but I think we can't see you anymore.
Oh, what happened here? Let's see. Okay, there we go.
You're back.
There, I'm back, yeah. I don't know what happened. So more people are packed in. There's different types of land uses that are just in a smaller area. So of course, in terms of taking parcels or like what Mike and Renee have been discussing, those types of activities are in much smaller area, so you could see a lot more trips that way. But that doesn't rule out cities that might have a more sprawled spatial characteristics. For example, places with really strong like downtown business districts or a more polycentric neighborhood centers. And that's a really strong characteristics of a lot of U.S. cities. These strong neighborhood centers. So it's very broad, and there's no one size fits all, of course. But then, if we could also think about political characteristics. So, what experience does the city have with other innovation and sustainability policies. You know, we've been hearing from Madison, and I do know that, you know, Madison has a pretty strong bicycle culture already. So maybe these are, you know, if these are cities who are already supporting these types of initiatives, then you could also see more success generated from that. Maybe another characteristic is, you know, how cities will support entrepreneurs and local economy. One of my case study cities for one of my research projects is the city of Austin. And there's a really strong sense of entrepreneurialism in Austin and local entrepreneurs, small businesses, and of course a lot of other cities have this as well. And so the cargo bikes also can be used in these situations with small businesses who are delivering goods, who are also delivering services around. So, you know, there's just such a large range of a scale of programs, and that's what is also really great about not only cargo bikes as a tool, but also, you know, programs around them, cycle logistics being one of them. And, you know, cycle logistics is more of a large scale operation. You know, if you're thinking of DHL, USPS, you know, these larger companies, and that really demands a different logistics concept than the traditional logistics of, you know, these huge trucks going to, you know, really centralized packaging districts and then going into the city or going into city centers to distribute. So, I mean, there's definitely no silver bullet, you know, for these types of solutions, but yeah, there's different ways to think about, you know, what types of characteristics of a city could be useful. So in summary, there's a lot of different vantage points that cargo bikes could be a bridge to bring together a bunch of different ideas.
What I'm getting out of that is basically there's no reason you can't find a way for your city to make it work.
Yeah, sure.
Whether it's political or, you know.
It's totally scalable, and that's one thing that a lot of cities are latching on to, that it can be a very small scale kind of subsidy-based program for small entrepreneurs, which is used heavily here in Amsterdam and the Netherlands, or you can really scale it up to a larger scale. And the city is also, a lot of cities in the Netherlands and Germany and UK, Denmark, you know, they're really making great experiments around this. You know, how can we really transform urban mobility logistics, you know, and that requires much larger thinking of, you know, transforming some land uses in the cities, packaging and distribution, kind of zoning. How do you think about, you know, it's a total shift from the traditional logistics system. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and you know, the thing is life as we know it has been evolving so quickly, especially when it comes to online shopping, and even I want to go pick up from Target instead of going into the store and getting it delivered. So it'll be interesting to see where we're at in the next 5 years of just, you know, cities and humans in general, especially after COVID. You know, I don't think any of us think life is going back the way that it was, which is kind of neat, especially all of us working from home and doing all that fun stuff.
It's a really great natural experiment.
It is. Well, yeah, it is. It's an interesting one. You know, we talked about a month ago, and you talked a little bit about bike infrastructure and about what you thought a city or an area needed in terms of bike infrastructure in order to make something like this work. What, in your opinion, what do you see and what do you think of that aspect of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's like the $1 million question, right? For especially in thinking about, you know, transferable lessons from places that have more mature cycling systems like the Netherlands or Denmark to American cities, which are much more emerging in nature. Although there's massively different scales between cities, of course. But, you know, in terms of bike infrastructure, one of the concepts that is really taking hold in a lot of the more emerging cycling cities in the US is the idea of networks. And, infrastructure is, as a term, you can think of street by street, curb by curb. But what we really need, and what psychologistics would really need, is a network of safe streets that connect all these destinations together, right? So in that way, it's not a project by project, a street by street, but let's rip off the Band-Aid and really, change the landscape here, because a lot of American streets are still very, very car-based, and changing them requires a labyrinth of regulation changing, of public process, of design review, and I mean, just the implementation around a single project is really extensive and very, very, very difficult. So this idea of a network of safe streets changes the idea that we need traffic management. There might not be space for every single mode on every single street. So instead, let's take this this management approach that delineates different roads for different purposes. If we're a neighborhood center, if you're at a neighborhood center or a commercial node or something, that's maybe not the place where you need 4 lanes of traffic. You probably don't need that, especially if you look at places here in the Netherlands. The neighborhood centers are very, very slow speeds, if any cars are around at all. And that type of mindset around traffic management really ensures that these types of bikes, I mean, these are big bikes, right? The ones that you guys were just showing.
Yeah.
And cargo bikes, they're a range of sizes, okay, but they're definitely larger than the average bike. But ensuring that these types of bikes can operate safely and that the riders aren't risking their lives. So, so that means these Vision Zero principles, sustainable safety principles around safe design, protected bike lanes, slow speeds, 20 miles per hour zones on all the city streets. The city of Amsterdam just passed this policy that all streets in the cities will be 20 mile per hour zone streets. So the treatment of these streets in places like commercial areas, neighborhood, residential areas, schools, where deliveries are mostly occurring, these need to be safe places for these drivers and riders to be. So, and then, I mean, that's just the street conversation, right? But then there's also the connection from the street to the sidewalks for easy, doorstep delivery. How do you actually get the bike up onto a sidewalk to, and reduce those physical barriers like on-street car parking? Really considering the sidewalk as a real estate as well for this type of bike. And then of course there's bike parking and electric charging stations. So it's bigger than just bike infrastructure. There's a lot of different infrastructure going on as well. So yeah, I mean, to be time competitive, cargo bikes need these types of benefits from streets.
Absolutely. And as someone who's not the most, I'm more of a mountain biker than a road biker, so cars kind of scare me a lot. And, riding on these streets, like, hey, trees don't text and drive, So if I hit one, it's on me.
Yeah.
But Meredith, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming to us today at 10 o'clock at night in Amsterdam to share your wisdom with us.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it. So now we're going to move over to Claudia from Bosch. Hi, Claudia.
Hi there.
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us a little bit about e-bikes. And I wanted to have you on this panel because I find when I talk to a lot of cities that a lot of people have never been on an e-bike before. And I think that's important for us to kind of talk about what happens with e-bikes. And, Bosch is such an amazing company, and they're so big. They have 400,000 employees, and they've been around since the 1800s. What made them get into e-bikes?
That's a great question. And you are right. So the wheels, let's say, of the Bosch group were actually set in motion more than 130 years ago in Stuttgart by our founder, Robert Bosch, because these wheels were actually pedal powered, because Robert was a passionate cyclist. And as a matter of fact, he was known for navigating the streets on a bicycle, which was considered very dangerous at this time, but also very forward-thinking. And it's easy to joke that the bicycle has been a part of the Bosch story since the very beginning, but it is the truth. So he started our company, and he had a vision to make high-quality technology that improves people's lives. And he always put customer trust above profit. And right from the start of the company, it was characterized by innovative strength and social commitment, which fits perfectly in the environment of e-bikes. So from our start, we have become one of the world's largest private companies, a leading supplier of technology and services. And our operations are actually divided in 4 different business sectors. And the biggest one, the most important one, is mobility solutions. So within mobility solutions, we are producing hundreds of millions of electronic components for cars each year. But as of 2008, we are building also e-bike systems. And the history behind it was that in 2008, the leaders of the Bosch group saw e-mobility overall, transportation fueled by electricity and not by gasoline, as inevitable. And we saw those mega trends, those important mega trends taking shape. More people were moving to cities, the phenomenon of urbanization, but also climate change became more threatening. And also in Europe, the complete population was aging. And also at the same time, battery technology was really improving by leaps and bounds. And rather than jump headfirst into electric cars, Bosch thought electric bikes in Europe had a better chance for mass adoption, especially in Europe. And we talked about that a little bit. We are blessed with a fantastic bicycle infrastructure, which is key because it's providing safe places to ride your bike. So at the same time, there were some people within Bosch come together and they realized, hey, we make world-class electric motors, batteries from our cordless power tools and control system. We just put these components together and we make an electric bike system. So that was really the beginning of the success story of e-bikes within the Bosch group. And from then on, the idea just grew wings, and a small team put together the first working e-bike prototype. We had lithium-ion technology on board because we have the cordless power tools. We are producing millions of electric motors for automotive applications like power steering and so on. So we just put those things together and built the first prototype. And 2 years later, we were on the market.
Oh, that's amazing. And I do love personally learning more and more about the e-bike industry and the brands and players involved. Just knowing that the technology that you guys are putting in your system is coming from other areas that have been using this technology for decades really helps with the safety and security. Part of me that, wants to make sure that everything's okay with the bikes. So speaking of, opportunities for e-bikes, what kind of opportunities do you see within a community aspect for e-bikes, and how do you think they will impact our communities kind of going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are a lot of aspects, and some of the colleagues here on the panel already touched on them. So first of all, anybody can ride an e-bike, anybody. So from the most really avid, seasoned bike rider to someone who has not been riding a bike since childhood, or maybe has not ridden a bike in his entire life. So really, e-bikes have a huge potential to expand bike riding to a completely new audience, and also keep or perpetuate this momentum and keep people riding their bikes throughout their entire life. So that's a great aspect. And this is so great news because e-bikes are really, they are the solution for so many issues in the world and to our major challenges. So they are tackling climate changing, they are improving sustainability, they are easing mobility in dense cities, they are fighting the growth obesity epidemic and much more. And we all know that the world's population is growing and resources are dwindling and the climate is changing. So we really need solutions, especially at these specific times of COVID. And we know that electromobility can make a significant contribution to sustainable urban development, an urban environment worth living in. So e-bikes really offer a fantastic opportunity, helping conserve resources and reduce emissions. And you are located in Madison, so you are very close to one of our most important customer, Trek, and the CEO of Trek, JB or John Berg, he really summarized the value of e-bikes in a brilliant way. He said they are a cheap date for any government interested in solving America's 3 big challenges, which are obesity, traffic congestion, and climate change. And in those specific times at the moment with the pandemic, they are also a safe solution for personal mobility, where no one wants to use public transportation opportunities. So those are, from my perspective, the most important advantages.
Absolutely. I think it's great to see how e-bikes have evolved and the perception of e-bikes have evolved. I know personally I might have been a little bit of a hater at first, and then I got to ride them, and now I desperately want a Trek rail. I get to see them around town a lot. So speaking, for our cities, safety is a pretty big thing. What kind of safety standards or certifications are there out there for e-bikes? I know that there's a range. There's Trek and Giant and all these wonderful big companies, and then there's people that are, hacking together battery cells in their basement. So are there standards for e-bikes at this point?
Yeah, that's another great question. And so my company, Bosch, has been in business, we talked about that, for almost more than 130 years. And one of the pillars of our success is really focus on quality, focus on safety and on sustainability. So our system has been developed and tested in harmony. So all the components of our system, the computer, the drive unit or the motor and the battery, they have been tested as a complete system. And actually, the system features the so-called UL certification, UL 2849. It's a very rigorous safety standard from UL, which is the underwriter's laboratory. So our system has to withstand those critical test requirements. And those standards, they are meant to measure and to validate the performance and the sustainability. And so they help to create a safer and more sustainable world. And so we are not only compliant with this specific safety standard, but we have been involved into its creation. And yeah, you mentioned it. By far, not all e-bikes are compliant to those rigorous safety standards. So actually, our system is one of the only systems which is compliant. So we always recommend consumers and dealers to look for this little icon or this little UL mark, because it's a synonym for safety, because it's a robust standard. and that ensures electrical and fire safety, and therefore it minimizes really the potential risk of fire or electric shock during the thousands of charging cycles a bike goes through its life.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Madison, we've actually had an e-bike store that lit on fire at one point, and I don't think Bosch is involved in those systems, but it's a real concern, both for cities as well as for individuals, to make sure that, especially for cities, that the technology they're putting in place is, safe, and especially for the risk management teams and city attorney offices out there that are going to be evaluating this. So it's great that there are some e-bike systems out there that are certified in that sense. Now, Claudia, one question I get all of the time is about how far an e-bike can go. Could you give us a little bit of an explanation? I know that the factors that influence this are great. How do you talk to people about the range situation? And are there any tools out there for determining what your potential range could be on a bike?
Yeah, the question is indeed, it's a very complex question, because there are a lot of circumstances to take into consideration when talking about the range. It starts with the weight of the complete bike/cargo. Talking about your eCargo bike with all the weight, additional weight, it has an impact on of course, on the range. And then also there are a lot of different batteries out there with a lot of different wattage hours, starting here in the US with 400 watts hour, but we also provide a dual battery solution, which ends up providing you almost 1300 watts hours. So that's huge. And then even things like the road condition or the pressure in your tire, this all had an impact on the range. And we always recommend to use a tool which we offer on our website, which is a range calculator. You just provide some information, and then you get an estimation of the range which you will get out of your bike. Taking into consideration what kind of battery do you have, what kind of bike do you have, and so on. So you just Google it, Bosch range calculator, and it will provide you the access to the tool and gives you really some certainty how much can you ride your bike without running out of juice. And of course, you also can choose between different assistance levels. So if you go in turbo mode, of course, that kind of leads into or translate into less range. So there is not a specific number I can give you, but I would motivate anybody to use the range calculator.
Yeah, I saw that on the website. It looks pretty neat in how you can select. I didn't think it would work for kind of what we were doing, and I was surprised that I could select dual batteries and really go up and down the hills and how hilly it is. So I thought that was a really neat tool that you have. So one thing in particular that's kind of a very technical question for you, but we hear it a lot, is that there's kind of two main different types of e-bike systems. There's a hub motor and then a mid-drive motor. Can you kind of give us an overview of what those are and what the differences are?
Yeah, sure. So we decided from the very beginning just to put all our eggs in the basket of a mid-drive system. So for mid-drive e-bike, the motor is positioned directly in between the pedals, so at the bike's bottom bracket. And first of all, this position ensures a very low and central center of gravity. So providing load balancing and creating the feeling of riding is just like a traditional bike. You do not feel the additional weight of the system at all. And also a difference riders cannot immediately see, but will experience in the end, especially on a long ride and especially on a hilly ride, is that the bike with a mid-drive motor works synergistically with the bike gears, and that translates into higher efficiency. So when a rider shifts gears to pedal at a neutral bike riding cadence, which is anything between 50 and 100 RPM. The motor in between the pedals is churning at an efficient RPM as well. And that's the difference to a hub system. A hub system means you have either the motor in the rear wheel or in the front wheel. So having it in the front wheel, usually you kind of feel a little bit like being driven. So it does not feel natural. You think like somebody is doing the steering for you. But talking about the efficiency with a hub drive, the motor drives the wheel, and which can then spin very slow on a steep hill. And when the motor is spinning slow, the rider is requesting a lot of help from the hub motor. And it can sometimes overheat. In best case scenario, it just shuts off temporarily. In worst case scenario, you may get permanent damage on the motor. And then also little incidents like a flat. So if you have a flat on a bike with a mid-drive, no issue. You just take care of the flat, that's it. But if you have a motor positioned in the wheel, then this becomes a major issue. So any kind of maintenance is more complicated if you have a hub drive system on your bike.
Absolutely. Yeah, and taking a wheel off of a very heavy bike can be super fun. So one last question for you, and this is a little bit broad. I know that you have been such an advocate and you do a lot of work within the bike industry from advocacy perspective. What advice or wisdom do you have, to share with advocates that are hoping to get e-bikes or eCargo bikes into the municipal fleets that they have?
Yeah, so we already talked a lot about bicycle infrastructure, which is crucial for further proliferation of e-bikes and also e-cargo bikes. What we have seen is very important is to include in your considerations logistic hubs, where delivery trucks coming from out of the city can unload the cargo to e-cargo bikes, and the e-cargo bikes then take care for the last delivery or last mile delivery. So those hubs is something what should be considered. Then what we have seen in Europe also is that incentives can play a major role in encouraging e-bike and e-cargo bike usage. So similar efforts here in the US, of course, would greatly expedite the transition here. And People for Bikes, who has done a great job in terms of legislation. Actually, at the moment, 28 states have implemented a 3+ legislation which defines exactly different classes of bikes and where they are allowed to ride. But now they are also shifting gears and paying a lot of attention to incentive programs, which really can help to accelerate the growth of e-bikes. Yeah, those are, I think, major points to consider.
Absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you on that, and I look forward to seeing how far we can take cargo bikes and e-cargo bikes and e-bikes into the future, and hopefully make the world a better place for everyone. So we promised a little bit of being able to answer some questions that we've gotten from the audience. I do see a couple of them that have come through. One of which is, do you look at other types of e-cargo bikes for different types of work, long tails, long johns, back seats, trikes, trailers, etc.? And is Saris planning to be a distributor for different types of cargo bikes? I can answer that one a little directly. Yes, you should absolutely look at different types of bikes for different types of jobs. As Renee had mentioned in some of her talk, we've seen different jobs that would be way better suited towards, say, a bike like the Urban Aero Shorty, which is a very compact kind of cargo bike, or a more long john bike, the Surly Big Fat Dummy, all of these kind of bikes. There's room there for a lot of different uses. And I think that's up to each individual city to really look at their own topography and their own, their own resources, their own relationships that they might have with manufacturers in order to figure out what the right mix is for them. And there's absolutely, I think one of the jobs that we've heard, like doing survey work or sewer surveys, as it turns out, they kind of do a lot of work on bike paths as well. That would be a really great fit for some of those smaller bikes. So definitely not everything isn't for the biggest bikes out there, but thank you for that question. I'm looking for other ones here. Sorry.
Hi, Patricia. I've got one that was directed, I think, at me, where it said,
Awesome.
we don't want an eCargo bike just to sit there as a symbolic gesture of bike friendliness. How do we get staff to use them if they're not really bought into biking? I think the answer is, I think there are a couple answers to that. First is what we found in the pilot was success was often framed about or around the participant being part of a pilot, that this was a chance for them to provide feedback on whether the bike can be a valuable tool. And I think whether it's private sector or public sector, employees just like to be engaged in high-level decision making. And so if you specifically around a pilot frame the use for the employee around, you're participating in this and we want your feedback, and we want your honest feedback. I think it makes the bike more approachable to the employee, knowing that they're part of something bigger, that they're part of the decision-making process happening at maybe several levels higher of management than they're at. I think the second is it needs to be framed as an option, that ideally the employee comes out knowing what they're doing that day, and given environmental factors, whether it's cold, rainy, sunny, that the bike is there as an option. It's not theirs for the day, that you now have to go use this bike. It's they walk out and like, okay, I'm doing X, Y, Z today. It's nice out. I want to take a bike, and it's there available for them. It's not being dictated. And so I think both of those are ways you can get employee buy-in, because ultimately what we found is that there were a lot of people who filled out the pre-participant survey who were very skeptical. Skeptical whether the bike was a good fit for their job or they were a good fit for the bike. And once they got on it and realized, I mean, it's this wow factor that happens every time you get on an e-bike. I have found with people who have never ridden it, is that this is I can do this, and this makes sense for the job I'm doing. And so you tend to get a lot of conversions of naysayers if you allow them to use the bike on their terms, and or if they're part of something bigger and they understand all of these other benefits that they may receive from being on the bike, whether it's health, productivity, efficiencies, all those sustainability side, if that appeals to them. So I think the key to buy-in is just framing it as a choice, and that they're part of a larger process.
Awesome. Completely agree. A couple other questions that I see. One is that Maddie mentioned different trials of bikes. We are currently doing pilots of bikes with various cities, municipalities, and organizations. If you would like some more information about potentially piloting a bike with us, please give us an email at eCargo@saris.com. We have a number of bikes, and we would really like to get them out into the world in order to help cities, see what e-bike technology can do for them. Another question I see relates to electric vehicles and electric bikes, and I think it's a very interesting question. They say that they are trying to work with their sustainability department and talking with them about, coupling bikes and e-bikes in electric vehicles. And one of the things I thought that they brought up, which is really important, is when we talk about sustainability departments and we talk about how things are funded and how funding is written, there is kind of a disconnect between how they handle e-bikes in electric vehicles and what we should be doing in the future. I don't think that the world has caught up to the e-bike craze yet. So I think it's going to be a balance between working within the nomenclature and the terminology that a sustainability team or a fleet management, fleet and sustainability and those types of departments have different language that they're using and different language that's in, say, their codes or the laws or grants and funding. So we need to be cognizant of being able to fit e-bikes into the sustainability kind of world and the fleet world, but also, like you mentioned, make a clear distinction in between what they are and what the utilities are and kind of their needs, especially when it comes to infrastructure. So I think that's a very good point, and it's not something that has been completely answered in the industry yet, and that's both in the sustainability world, in the fleet world, as well as in kind of our bike-friendly world, something that I'm sure will be sussed out here in the next few years as this technology gets more and more adopted. And I think so. Someone asked, sorry, go ahead, Amelia.
Sorry, we've gotten several questions about liability and risk management, those types of topics, and I wanted to see if you or Renee could touch on that. It seems like a frequent concern for a few of our attendees.
Absolutely. I'll let Renee touch on it a little bit. From my experience in working in the government field, the risk management is going to be a big hurdle. What we found is that some cities and municipalities, like their insurance policies won't let their employees ride bikes. It's not a part of their policy. So in order to do a pilot, they might have to go in and get a rider put on that insurance policy or some language changed. Risk management was definitely involved. I know that we've had conversations about training and potentially using like League, the League instructor programs to help do more training for that risk management aspect, wearing helmets, that sort of thing. Renee, what did you find with the city of Madison and how they approached it?
Sure. Now, I think, for us, the easiest part was we already allowed employees to use bikes. So we had been down that road a long time ago. We have some department bikes, and we have, bike share passes, which happen to be electric assist bikes that anyone can go in and reserve in place of a vehicle. So we'd kind of already been through the basic issues of using bikes. And I think for us, my feeling has always been if people can drive a very large vehicle that is motorized, that is more likely to cause liability concerns realistically, then bikes should be, right? Like that's not a big deal at all comparatively. But since we had already gone down the road and said, yes, people can ride a bike share bike for work, there's some department bikes and that's fine for the departments to have them, I really then took that as well, this is an electric vehicle. We have electric vehicles. We can pilot this. We don't require, like you say, I have a driver's license and you can drive a vehicle more or less, in my opinion. So bikes for us were not a big reach, but I know we already had a discussion on the surface just about riding a regular everyday bicycle. Then you're going to have to talk to your risk management and kind of work through some of those issues that Patricia did. Once we did that, then for me, that was a wholesale, bikes are vehicles, electric bikes they're legal here in our state. And so we can pilot this the same we might pilot an electric car or a hybrid car or something. But I'm sure other cities would have to jump through a few more hoops than I felt like we needed to do this.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's something we're finding as we have these conversations with other cities. Every city is unique. They'll tell you that. So and sometimes it comes down to the individual risk manager and the city attorney. And if they can sign off on it, then you're good to go. But sometimes it's not an easy road to get up, One other question that someone brought up is talking about how the logistics of municipalities getting these into their fleets. If they don't fit into existing public works fleets with scheduling, leasing, and purchasing. So what are you guys finding with the city of Madison as it sounds like the Madison is thinking about going ahead with a purchase. How does that work logistically, within the city budgets and purchasing?
Sure. So unfortunately, this probably is like the worst time to try to buy some bikes, just because I'm sure like other cities, budgets are really tight, really looking to cut back, not add to it. So, we definitely have a very progressive fleet manager, and I gave Fleet the bike first to trials to just get that enthusiasm going. And I know that they're very committed to, these are cheaper than other vehicles they might purchase. And so they like the idea of purchasing something that's less expensive but has a lot of utility. And I know Maddie's department engineering has a lot of interest in kind of putting this in their budget because it fits really well for them. But we are also looking at some different grant opportunities that have typically been more focused on electric cars, electric vehicles, not bicycles as vehicles, but I really want to pursue some of those as well, which probably wouldn't be as big a deal if we weren't, in a pandemic time and have tighter budgets. We might be able to, get more of these more easily because they're much cheaper than buying a typical electric, little car, one of the little utility vehicles. So it wouldn't be as big a deal if we weren't all cutting our budgets. So definitely looking at the sort of more electric vehicle type grants that exist out there.
Absolutely. I really think it's going to come from the sustainability side and either the equity grants or the sustainability grants for this to be funded. And you're right, pandemic budgets are very interesting. But one thing that the forestry guys told me was that usually when they were using that bike, typically they would use a Bobcat for that, and Bobcats are $50,000 and up. So they're saving the wear and tear on their Bobcat from running back and forth to plant those trees all day long, as well as not annoying everybody that lives down there because of the beeping and the noise versus a silent bike. So we found that to be pretty well good. So we are at the end of our hour and a half. I think we should probably have to call it. I know we have a ton of questions that we didn't quite get to. If you're interested in getting some of those questions answered, feel free to give us an email at eCargo@saris.com. And I would also like to make another pitch for Giving Tuesday, next Tuesday. If you could please donate to the League of American Bicyclists. They do such amazing work, like putting on presentations like this and all of their wonderful things. bikeleague.org. Go right there to donate now. Otherwise, join or renew your membership. And I think that's about it, Amelia. I will leave it to you if you have any final thoughts.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to say, I didn't ask her to say that, but I do really appreciate it. And thank you again, Patricia, for pulling together this really awesome panel. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thanks for our attendees for hanging in with us for 90 minutes. So I know it's a lot the week of Thanksgiving, but we're so grateful to everyone for your time, and look forward to continuing this conversation. As Patricia said, there were a lot of questions, and I've even been chatting with a few of the people asking questions about having them speak on follow-up webinars. So stay tuned. I think there's a lot more potential content here. And I'll also put in a pitch for the National Bike Summit, which is going to be February 28th to March 3rd. It is going to be virtual, and we're opening registration very soon. So keep an eye out on the League's website and social media for more info there. But hopefully lots of great ways to continue the conversation on this topic at future webinars and at the National Bike Summit in March. So thank you again. Have a great evening. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and take care. All right.
Thanks, guys.